I learned early that the galaxy measured civilizations by age. The Galactic Council was dominated by species that had traveled between stars for thousands of years. Their empires controlled hundreds of worlds, their histories filled entire archives, and their leaders spoke with the confidence of people who believed they had already seen everything. Humanity was different. We had entered space only 50 years earlier. We controlled 23 colonies and were still considered a young, minor civilization. Most alien representatives viewed us with polite curiosity rather than respect. I had grown used to it. Then there was Eden Prime. It was one of our most prosperous worlds, home to more than 8 million people. It had green continents, blue oceans, expanding cities, and no significant military importance. Families lived there. Children attended schools. Freighters carried food and resources between its orbital stations and the surface. It was exactly the kind of world everyone assumed would be left alone. They were wrong. The Dravik arrived with a demand. 4 human colonies, along with their resources, were to be surrendered immediately. Earth refused. The Dravik leader, Varric, sent only one reply. You still don't understand who you dealing with. Within hours, their fleet began moving toward Eden Prime. I watched the tactical display in silence. For the first time, I understood that the galaxy was about to discover something it had never considered important. Humanity was not going to surrender. The emergency session began less than an hour after the Dravik fleet changed course. I entered the council chamber with the other human representatives and immediately understood how badly the situation had deteriorated. Every seat was occupied. Delegates who normally ignored one another were speaking in low, urgent voices. Tactical projections hovered above the central floor, showing the growing mass of Dravik warships. Eden Prime was at the center of the display. 8 million civilians. No major fleet. No military alliance. Just a peaceful human colony standing directly in the path of an empire that had decided it wanted our territory. The council speaker called for order. One representative after another took the floor. The arguments were almost identical. Humanity should negotiate. Humanity should surrender the 4 colonies. Humanity should evacuate Eden Prime before the Dravik arrived. Some delegates were more direct. The Dravik cannot be defeated, one said. Earth must understand the consequences of provoking them. Another suggested that surrendering the colonies might preserve peace. I listened without speaking. Then the Dravik delegation appeared. Varric stood before us through a towering holographic projection. His black armored body filled the center of the chamber. You have been given an opportunity to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, he said. Accept the transfer of the 4 colonies, and the Dravik fleet will continue on its present course. A delegate asked about Eden Prime. Varric paused. Eden Prime is not part of the agreement. That answer caused several representatives to relax. I did not, because I understood what he had not said. He had not promised to leave Eden Prime alone. I requested the floor. The chamber quieted. I stood beneath the council's lights and looked toward Varric. Humanity will not surrender its colonies, I said. And we will not abandon our citizens. Varric's mandibles moved slightly. Perhaps it was amusement. Perhaps it was contempt. You still don't understand, he said. Then his image disappeared. The council fell silent. Outside, the Dravik fleet continued toward Eden Prime. No one sent help. Not yet. And that was when I realized we were alone. For the next 2 days, I watched the council prove exactly how little its promises were worth. The Dravik fleet continued toward Eden Prime. More ships joined it every hour. Their formation expanded across the tactical display until the projected mass of warships looked less like a fleet and more like a moving wall. Humanity requested assistance. The answer was always the same. The Aurelian Compact would not intervene without a formal council mandate. The Veyran hegemony considered the dispute a regional matter. 3 smaller powers offered humanitarian aid, but only if the Dravik permitted it. The council debated. The Dravik advanced. That was the entire process. I stood before the chamber on the second evening and asked the question no one wanted to answer. If Eden Prime is attacked, Will the Council defend its civilians? Silence followed. Then Speaker Oral gave the official response. The Council cannot authorize military action against a recognized sovereign power without sufficient evidence of an imminent violation of interstellar law. I almost laughed. The fleet approaching Eden Prime was visible on every screen in the galaxy. That was not sufficient evidence. My colleague Emily Parker requested the floor. She had been quieter than I was throughout the crisis. Until that moment, she had spoken only during private consultations. She walked to the central platform and looked across the chamber. If they attack our civilians, she said, humanity will respond. Nothing about her voice was dramatic. That made it worse. Several delegates exchanged amused looks. One elderly representative actually smiled. They believed Emily was bluffing. They believed Earth had neither the ships nor the weapons to challenge the Dravik. The Dravik delegation released a public statement before the session ended. Eden Prime, Varric announced, would become an example to humanity, an example to every civilization that refused to obey the Dravik. The Council chose neutrality. No fleet came. No alliance was formed. No ultimatum was issued. That night, I returned to the human embassy and watched Eden Prime on the tactical display. The colony looked tiny against the surrounding darkness. I remember thinking that 8 million people had just been abandoned by 47 civilizations. I also remember Emily standing beside me. They think we're helpless, she said. I looked at her. Are we? She was silent for several seconds. Then she answered, no, and for the first time, I wondered what humanity had been keeping from the galaxy. I returned to Earth 3 hours later. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Normally, the command center beneath the Pacific Coalition headquarters was filled with voices, alarms, and the constant movement of officers between stations. That night, everyone seemed to be listening to the same transmission. Eden Prime. The Dravik fleet had entered the system. I stood behind the command staff and watched the tactical display update. Thousands of enemy vessels appeared around the planet, forming concentric defensive rings. Admiral Michael Carter was already there. I had met him several times before. He was a former fleet commander, retired after 30 years of service. He rarely spoke unless there was something worth saying. Now he stared at the display. Planetary defenses? He asked. Active, an officer replied. Fleet, local defense squadron is holding position. Michael nodded once. Then his personal communicator vibrated. He looked at the message. His expression changed. Sir? I asked. My daughter lives there. He turned the screen toward me. Sarah Carter, civilian resident, Eden Prime. Her son Ethan was 9 years old. Michael had not mentioned them before. Perhaps he had not wanted to. The Dravik began their attack 6 minutes later. The first wave struck the outer defense platforms. The display erupted with red markers. Human batteries fired. For several minutes, Eden Prime fought. Then the planetary network began collapsing. One defense platform vanished. Then another. The Dravik continued forward. Michael watched without moving. Can we reinforce them? I asked. No. Can we evacuate civilians? Not now. Why? He finally looked at me. Because the Dravik have sealed the system. The room went quiet again. A communications officer suddenly spoke. Sir, we're receiving a transmission. From Eden Prime? No. The officer swallowed. From the Dravik. The main screen changed. Varric appeared. Behind him was the surface of Eden Prime. Cities burned beneath a dark sky. Varric looked directly into the camera. Every civilization is watching, he said. Then he smiled. This is what happens when the weak refuse to understand the strong. Michael stared at the screen. His daughter and grandson were somewhere below that sky. He said nothing. Neither did I. We simply watched as the galaxy began to watch with us. For the next 48 hours, Eden Prime became a place the galaxy watched without helping. The Dravik had seized the orbital defenses within the first hour. By the 6th, their troops had entered the largest cities. By the 12th, every major communication network on the planet was under their control. Then Varric made his final decision. The invasion would be broadcast live. Every council station received the transmission. Every major civilization received it. Even worlds that had refused to intervene were forced to watch. I was in the command center when the first images appeared. At first, I saw streets. Then fire. Then people running. The Dravik moved through the cities in organized formations. They did not need to rush. Their victory was already certain. The broadcast showed everything. Homes being searched. Buildings burning. Civilians being forced into streets. Bodies left behind. No military explanation accompanied the images. No attempt was made to hide them. Varric wanted the galaxy to understand. Humanity had challenged the Dravik. This was the price. Michael Carter stood several meters away from me, staring at the screen. He had not slept. Nobody had. Then the camera shifted. A residential district appeared. Michael suddenly stepped forward. Stop. The operator froze. Zoom in. The image sharpened. A street. Damaged buildings. A crowd moving between them. Then Michael saw her. Sarah. For half a second, I could not understand why he had stopped breathing. Then I saw the child beside her. Ethan. 9 years old. He was holding his mother's hand. The Dravik soldiers were moving toward them. Michael did not shout. He did not cry. He simply stood there, watching the screen as if his mind had refused to accept what his eyes were showing him. The transmission continued. Sarah pulled Ethan behind her. The image shook. Then the screen went black. The broadcast had ended. Nobody in the command center spoke. Michael remained still for several seconds. Then he turned away from the screen. He walked toward the sealed doors leading deeper into the facility. I followed him. Admiral, I said quietly. He stopped. For the first time since I had known him, I saw something different in his face. Not grief, not rage, something colder. Open Project Titan, he said. The officer at the security station stared at him. Sir, Titan is classified beyond your authorization. Michael looked at him. I know. Then why? Because I designed it. The doors opened, and humanity finally stopped waiting. Project Titan had existed for 73 years. I knew that because Michael Carter showed me the original authorization file while we descended beneath the command center. The document was older than the Galactic Council's recognition of humanity as a spacefaring civilization. That disturbed me more than anything I had seen on Eden Prime. Why was it created? I asked. Michael kept walking. Because one day someone would decide civilians were an acceptable target. The corridor ended at a sealed door. Michael placed his hand against the scanner. Nothing happened. Then he entered a code manually. The door opened. Beyond it was a facility I had never known existed. Hundreds of engineers stood around massive machines. Screens covered the walls. Ship designs rotated above workstations. Power readings climbed through numbers I did not understand. A man in a gray engineering uniform approached us. Admiral. Michael nodded. Ryan Brooks? Still here. Ryan looked at me briefly before returning his attention to Michael. How bad? Michael answered with one sentence. They killed Eden Prime. Ryan's expression changed. Not dramatically. He simply became still. Then he turned toward the main display. Then Titan is active. The room changed immediately. Technicians stopped working on civilian projects and began opening sealed systems. Storage doors unlocked. Hidden manufacturing lines powered up beneath the facility. I watched as a holographic map of human space appeared. It showed hundreds of locations I had never seen before. Factories, shipyards, military installations, colonies marked with unfamiliar symbols. How long has this been here? I asked. Ryan answered without looking at me. Long enough. Michael stepped toward the display. Explain Titan. Ryan hesitated. Then he enlarged a schematic. This ISNT weapon, Admiral. It's an infrastructure system. I frowned. Ryan continued. Ships, fuel, weapons, training, logistics, everything required to fight a war without depending on foreign territory. Michael studied the display. Capacity? Ryan gave a quiet answer. 15,000 warships. I stared at him. The number seemed impossible. Humanity had never possessed more than a few hundred vessels that the galaxy knew about. Ryan noticed my expression. They weren't hidden because we wanted to surprise anyone. Then why? Michael answered for him. Because preparation is easier when nobody knows you. Preparing. For the first time, I understood. Humanity had not been building an army for the Dravik. We had been building one for the day we would need it. That day had finally arrived. For the first time since I had entered the command center, nobody spoke about diplomacy. There would be no more council sessions. No requests for assistance. No appeals to civilizations that had watched Eden Prime burn. Project Titan had changed everything. The following weeks passed without announcements. Earth did not threaten the Dravik. We did not declare revenge. We simply began preparing. Human colonies received sealed orders. Military personnel were recalled from foreign assignments. Civilian shipyards were converted to wartime production. Merchant vessels were requisitioned, modified, and returned to service. Training centers expanded until there were not enough instructors. Then the recruitment began. Millions volunteered. Some had military experience. Most did not. I watched ordinary people walk into recruitment centers carrying nothing but identification documents. Factory workers, engineers, teachers, pilots, students. Nobody promised them glory. Nobody told them the war would be easy. They were told only that humanity had been attacked and that the fighting would continue until the threat was gone. The galaxy noticed eventually. Foreign governments began asking questions. Earth refused to answer. For 6 months, the human worlds worked. Day and night, shipyards burned with light. Factories produced armor, weapons, engines, ammunition, and replacement parts. New ships emerged from construction docks so quickly that tracking systems struggled to maintain accurate counts. Michael Carter returned to active command on the 31st day. He looked older than before. Nobody mentioned Sarah or Ethan. Nobody needed to. Their names were already engraved on the memorial lists being prepared on Earth. Michael spent most of his time studying Dravik territory. He learned their supply routes, their military bases, their communications networks, their command hierarchy, every weakness, every habit, every assumption. Ryan Brooks eventually brought us the final projection. 15,000 warships, he said. The room went silent. Michael looked at the display. Ready? Ryan nodded. Ready. Michael studied the fleet for several seconds. Then he gave the order. Move them. Across human space, thousands of ships began leaving their hidden bases. The galaxy did not notice. Not yet. The Dravik still believed humanity was broken. They believed the broadcasts had achieved their purpose. They believed Earth was grieving. They were right about the grieving. They were wrong about what grief had produced. I was aboard the human flagship when the fleet disappeared. Not metaphorically. One moment, 15,000 warships occupied the tactical display. The next, every human vessel vanished from Dravik sensors. The ships had not jumped. They had not retreated. They had simply become invisible. Ryan Brooks stood beside the command console, watching the readings with quiet satisfaction. Project Titan's first system, he said. Distributed transit masking. I looked at him. You built 15,000 ships that can hide from Dravik sensors? We built them so the Dravik wouldn't know where to look. Michael Carter entered the command deck. He did not look at the fleet. He looked at the clock. Begin Phase 2. Across human space, hidden transmitters activated. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the fleet began moving. Not toward the Dravik border. Through it. Human ships emerged inside Dravik territory without warning. The first appeared beside a military fuel depot. The second appeared above an orbital weapons platform. Then 10. Then 100. Then thousands. Every emergence was precisely timed. The Dravik had built their defenses around the assumption that an enemy would approach from outside. Humanity did not approach. We appeared where the defenses were weakest. I watched the tactical map fill with human markers. Dravik commanders reacted almost immediately. Their fleets scrambled, weapons batteries activated, Emergency orders flooded their networks. But the human fleet was already moving. We struck communications stations first, then fuel depots, then shipyards, then command centers. No planetary bombardment, no indiscriminate fire. Michael had issued one order before the operation began. Do not target civilians. It was repeated across every human fleet. We were not there to punish the Dravik population. We were there to destroy the machine that had attacked us. For the first time, the galaxy saw what 15,000 human warships looked like when they appeared simultaneously across an empire. Council observers struggled to understand what they were seeing. Some believed the fleet was an illusion. Others thought the Dravik had suffered a system-wide failure. Then the human communication network activated. Every major galactic channel was interrupted. Michael Carter appeared on millions of screens. His face was calm. His voice was quiet. You broadcast the deaths of our people for the galaxy to watch. He paused. Now watch what happens next. Then the human fleet opened fire. The first Dravik fleet to respond never reached its destination. Human ships were already waiting. They emerged from concealment around the Dravik formation, weapons locked, engines silent. Before the enemy could establish a defensive pattern, the human fleet opened fire. The engagement lasted 9 minutes. When it ended, every major Dravik warship in the sector had been disabled or destroyed. I watched the tactical display without speaking. There was no celebration, no cheering, only officers moving from one station to another, reporting targets, confirming civilian evacuation corridors, and preparing the next operation. That was when I understood the difference between what the galaxy believed humanity was doing and what we were actually doing. We were not fighting a battle. We were dismantling a system. Human forces struck simultaneously across dozens of Dravik-controlled worlds. Shipyards were seized before their fleets could launch. Fuel reserves were destroyed. Military communication arrays were cut. Supply depots disappeared from the tactical network one after another. The Dravik attempted to regroup. Michael anticipated every move. They moved toward their largest fortress. Human ships were already there. They concentrated their remaining fleet around a strategic world. Human submarines, ships designed for planetary oceans, appeared inside their atmosphere and destroyed the command network before disappearing again. They tried to hide their remaining vessels among civilian traffic. Michael ordered our fleet to hold fire until every military vessel was identified. It slowed the campaign. He accepted the delay. We are fighting the Dravik military, he told us, not the Dravik species. That sentence became the foundation of the entire war. Civilian transports were given safe corridors. Occupied populations were warned before major operations. Human forces evacuated civilians from active combat zones whenever possible. But there was no mercy for military command centers. Every Dravik officer involved in the Eden Prime invasion became a priority target. Varric understood what was happening after the third week. He issued an emergency broadcast, demanding negotiations. Michael ignored it. The Dravik had spent centuries building an empire that depended on fear. Humanity attacked the machinery that created that fear. World by world, fleet by fleet, the empire began to collapse. And the galaxy watched in silence. This time, nobody laughed. The Dravik collapse did not happen in a single battle. It happened quietly, system by system. By the fourth month, their fleet had lost more than 70% of its operational strength. Their shipyards were damaged. Their supply routes were broken. Their commanders could no longer communicate reliably with one another. I watched the tactical map change every morning. Worlds that had been marked red became gray, then green. Human forces were not occupying them permanently. We entered, destroyed military infrastructure, secured civilian populations, and withdrew once the threat was gone. The Dravik government attempted to reorganize. They moved their remaining fleets toward the imperial capital. Michael expected it. He had already placed 3 human fleets along their escape routes. When the Dravik realized this, they stopped moving. For the first time, their empire became completely still. Then Varric requested negotiations. Michael accepted. The meeting took place aboard a neutral station under Council observation. I was present. Varric looked different. The confidence was gone. His armored body remained upright, but his movements were slower. Behind him stood only 2 guards. Michael entered alone. No honor guard. No weapon visible. They faced each other across a transparent table. "You have destroyed my military," Varric said. Michael nodded. "Yes, you could have destroyed our homeworld." "Yes, why didn't you?" Michael looked at him for several seconds. "Because your civilians didn't broadcast the executions." Varric said nothing. Michael continued. "You made a choice. Your soldiers followed it. Your civilians did not." I remember the silence afterward. It was the first time I saw a Dravik leader genuinely unable to answer. The final agreement was signed 3 days later. The Dravik withdrew from every human colony. Their surviving forces surrendered strategic weapons and abandoned occupied worlds. Humanity demanded reparations, recognition of territorial sovereignty, and guarantees that no civilian population would ever again be used as a weapon of intimidation. The galaxy expected us to demand more. We did not. The war was over, but the political consequences had only begun. The Galactic Council summoned Earth for an emergency session. This time, nobody laughed when the human delegation entered. Every seat was occupied. Every representative was watching us. And for the first time, I understood that the galaxy was no longer asking whether humanity was dangerous. It was asking how dangerous we might become if someone forced us to be. The emergency council session began 6 days after the Dravik surrender. I had attended hundreds of council meetings before that day. None had ever felt like this. The chamber was silent when the human delegation entered. No laughter, no whispers, no dismissive smiles. Representatives who had once treated humanity as a minor frontier civilization now watched us with the careful attention normally reserved for ancient military powers. The speaker stood. "Humanity has requested recognition as a major galactic power." The statement echoed through the chamber. I expected opposition. Instead, the first delegate to speak was from the Aurelian Compact. "We support the request." Another civilization followed, then another. Within minutes, the vote was almost unanimous. Humanity had become a major power. Not because the Council had decided to grant us importance. Because 15,000 warships had forced the galaxy to acknowledge what we already were. New treaties followed. The first guaranteed the sovereignty of human colonies. The second prohibited attacks against civilian populations as instruments of intimidation. The third created an independent evacuation authority for worlds threatened by military occupation. The galaxy called these reforms historic. I considered them late. The most interesting change happened outside the Council. For decades, alien governments had approached Earth cautiously, usually seeking trade agreements or scientific exchanges. Now they wanted alliances. Ambassadors arrived constantly. Some offered military cooperation. Others offered intelligence. Several proposed mutual defense treaties. The same civilizations that had refused to send a single ship to Eden Prime now wanted human protection. Michael rejected most of them. "We are not building an empire," he told the Council. "We are making sure nobody mistakes restraint for weakness again." That sentence was repeated across the galaxy. But the military campaign had changed something deeper. Alien analysts began studying human history. They discovered that our wars had never been won by individual weapons alone. They had been won through logistics, industry, preparation, adaptation. Humanity had not possessed 15,000 warships because we suddenly became powerful. We possessed them because someone had spent decades preparing for a war nobody believed would happen. The Dravik had mistaken our silence for helplessness. The Council had mistaken our youth for inexperience. Both had made the same error. They had judged humanity by what we chose to display. They had never considered what we might be capable of hiding. 1 year after Eden Prime fell, the galaxy finally understood the difference. The war ended, but the galaxy did not return to what it had been. Every civilization had watched the Dravik campaign. They had seen human fleets appear inside supposedly secure territory. They had watched military bases fall without planetary bombardment. They had seen Dravik commanders surrender while their civilians were evacuated by the same forces destroying their armies. But there was one question everyone wanted answered. What would humanity do with the Dravik? The Council expected punishment. Some expected annexation. Others believed Earth would demand the destruction of the entire Dravik military caste. Michael Carter rejected all three. He addressed the Council 6 months after the surrender. We will not destroy a species because its government chose war. The chamber remained silent. We will dismantle its ability to wage that war again. That became human policy. Dravik warships were surrendered. Military shipyards were placed under inspection. Weapons production was restricted. Senior officers responsible for the Eden Prime massacre were arrested and transferred to an international tribunal. Varric was among them. Human investigators presented evidence recovered from the broadcast network. Millions had watched the massacre. Now millions watched the trial. The irony was not lost on anyone. Varric was convicted of crimes against civilians and sentenced to permanent imprisonment. Human forces then began withdrawing from Dravik territory. We left their cities intact. We repaired damaged civilian infrastructure where our operations had caused destruction. We returned prisoners. We opened humanitarian corridors. The galaxy struggled to understand it. After everything the Dravik had done, humanity had won, and then stopped. Michael explained it simply. Victory means the threat is gone. Anything after that is something else. I remembered that sentence for years. Because the galaxy had expected humanity to become another empire. We did not. We became something less comfortable. A civilization capable of overwhelming military force that did not need to use it constantly. That distinction changed diplomacy. Species that once ignored Earth began teaching human military history in their academies. Children on distant worlds learned the name Eden Prime. And everywhere, the same lesson was repeated. Do not attack human civilians. Do not mistake silence for surrender. Do not assume that what humanity shows you is everything humanity possesses. The galaxy had learned that lesson from the Dravik. It would not forget it. A year after the war, I returned to Eden Prime. The planet had changed. The cities were being rebuilt, but the scars remained. Entire districts had been cleared of rubble. New buildings stood beside foundations that would never be reconstructed. Trees had been planted along streets where people had once run from Dravik soldiers. The memorial stood near the coast. It was enormous, but deliberately simple. There were no statues of soldiers. No weapons. No images of Michael Carter. Only millions of lights. Each light represented a civilian who had died during the invasion. I arrived before sunrise. The memorial was almost empty. Michael was already there. He stood several meters from the lights, wearing his old service uniform. I approached him but did not speak. Neither of us needed to. For several minutes, we watched the lights. Then Michael said, "They rebuilt the school." I looked toward the distant city. "Yes, Sarah used to take Ethan there." He stopped. I waited. She hated the uniforms. It was such an ordinary memory that it hurt more than anything else. Michael looked back at the memorial. He wanted to be a pilot. I said nothing. The sun began rising over the ocean. Light spread across Eden Prime, touching the memorial one row at a time. For the first time, I understood why Michael had refused to celebrate the victory. There had been no victory for Sarah. None for Ethan. None for the millions represented by those lights. The war had ended. Humanity had survived. But survival was not the same as winning. Across the galaxy, the political order had changed permanently. The Council now recognized humanity as one of the major powers. The Dravik Empire had been reduced to a fraction of its former territory. Military academies taught the Eden Prime campaign. Diplomats spoke carefully when dealing with Earth. But none of that mattered to Michael. He stood before the lights and watched the sun rise. I asked him once what he thought the galaxy had learned. He answered without looking at me. They learned that humans can be pushed. He paused. They just learned too late that we can push back. Then he walked away. I remained at the memorial. Millions of lights continued burning behind me. And somewhere beyond Eden Prime, across a galaxy that had once considered humanity insignificant, civilizations were finally beginning to understand what the Dravik had failed to understand. Human silence had never been weakness. It had been restraint. And restraint, once exhausted, was not easily restored. A year after the war, I stood beneath millions of lights on Eden Prime. Each one represented a civilian who had died during the invasion. There were no statues of generals, no weapons, no celebrations, only names. Michael Carter stood beside me in silence. The galaxy had changed since the Dravik attack. Humanity was now recognized as a major power. New treaties protected our colonies. Foreign governments sought alliances with Earth. Military academies across dozens of worlds studied the campaign that had begun with one peaceful colony. But none of that mattered here. Michael looked across the memorial. They thought the broadcast would break us, he said. I looked at the lights. They were wrong. He nodded. They showed the galaxy are dead. He paused, and the galaxy watched. The wind moved across the memorial. I thought about Eden Prime before the war. Children running through streets. Families going to work, people who had never imagined their deaths would become a message to an entire civilization. The Dravik had believed fear would make humanity surrender. Instead, grief had united us. We had not become an empire. We had not erased the Dravik species. We had simply made certain that no one would ever mistake our restraint for weakness again. Michael turned toward the memorial one final time. Then he walked away. I remained there until the last light of sunset disappeared. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity had been silent for decades because we preferred peace. We had been patient because patience was cheaper than war. We had prepared because preparation was safer than hope. But when the Dravik killed millions of our people and broadcast their deaths to every screen in the galaxy, they believed they were showing everyone the destruction of humanity. They had shown everyone something else. The moment humanity decided to unite. The moment restraint ended. The moment the galaxy finally understood that human silence had never been weakness. It had been a choice. And humanity had finally chosen to answer.